Judge Napolitano standing by, Fox News senior judicial analyst. And the big question, Judge, is what is next now?
Well, it really depends, as John and Ed Henry were just discussing, where they bring this guy. My guess is they will not bring him to Guantanamo Bay because of the president's antipathy to Gitmo as a place for housing prisoners. My guess is that they'll bring him to Reagan National, which means that he would be tried in the Northern District of Virginia, the federal courts in Alexandria, Virginia, which are typically the government's favorite place to try criminal defendants when the crime occurs outside the U.S. The law is he shall be tried in the judicial district where he first sets foot in the U.S. or where the harm that he caused was perceived in the U.S.
That's interesting because we've often talked about New York and the courts in New York being the area where these terrorists are tried, and I'm assuming that's because of the ties to 9/11 for some of these terrorists.
Well,
and in this case...
Well, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York in Manhattan has the best track record in the country for successfully prosecuting terrorist suspects and getting convictions, and convictions that withstand appeals. They have a large and excellent team that does these prosecutions, both FBI and lawyers. So they are certainly equipped to do it. There was a similar team, though not as large, but just as well reputed, in the Northern District of Virginia, again, right outside of Washington, D.C. That is the place that I think the government will probably take him to.
How would he be treated? Who will represent him? Walk us through some of those next steps for this individual.
Well, he will be in a federal district court, meaning he'll have all the rights that any defendant has, that any American or non-American has in a federal district court, all the rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. He will probably be represented either by a federal public defender, that is, an employee of the federal government whose job it is to represent indigent criminal defendants in major prosecutions, or sometimes some lawyer will come out from nowhere, like the lawyer that represented the sheikh that had a hook on his hand, a very, very fine criminal defense lawyer in New York City who I think did it for free. So sometimes you get lawyers like that. But in terms of his rights under the Constitution, his right to confront the evidence against him, his right to confront the witnesses against him, the presumption of innocence, the right to remain silent, the right to a speedy trial, he has all those rights that the rest of us do.
So right now, has he been read his Miranda rights? It always comes up when there is an alleged terrorist that has been captured.
Typically,
where and when those rights are read?
Typically, the military does not read Miranda rights. Typically, his Miranda rights will be read to him once he's transferred from the military which arrested him, and according to Ed Henry is still housing him, into the hands of the U.S. Marshals who will deliver him into a federal court. That might occur in Tripoli, Libya, or it might occur at Reagan National.
The reason why I ask, of course, is timeline, right? Because the terrorist attacks happened so many years ago, and here we are. Many in the public have been waiting for the arrest.
You know,
and what happens with this trial?
The Miranda warning might not be very crucial in this case because of what this guy has been saying in public about his own role when he was free prior to his arrest, as John just pointed out. The government has a slam dunk case against him because of his admissions to media and other people not too long ago in a cafe in Libya.
But not exactly, Judge. As I'm looking back over this article in October of 2012 in the New York Times, he paints a little bit of a different picture. Of course, he was coy with the reporter, but he says he showed up that night and he didn't have anything to do with the attack, and that the people inside the compound fired the first shots, and he wasn't there the entire time, and he went later. And so he has his own, story of this event. Will he be able to tell that story?
Well, he might be able to tell that story to his benefit, because sometimes the government intentionally arrests someone at the bottom of the totem pole, charges them with a serious crime, and then they trade information about people north of him on the totem pole in return for a lesser charge or a guilty plea to a lesser charge. So the government may know exactly what it's doing by having arrested him. He may actually be the gateway to the people who plotted and planned this thing.
So you're saying that it just might be part of a larger puzzle that the government is putting together.
Yes, he may not have been the person who killed Chris Stevens or who ignited the flames that consumed the consulate, but he may know the people who did.
And that's the big question. How much is he a part of this terror group? What sort of role did they have in the actual murder of Americans? What is he facing, potentially, as far as time behind bars?
Well, he's facing the death penalty. Absolutely, he's facing the death penalty. the charge would be using a weapon of mass destruction to kill Americans, and that's the death penalty. Even in states that don't have the death penalty, the federal government has the death penalty. So that's a tremendous incentive to him to negotiate with the government by giving the government information that it wants in return for them charging him with a crime that does not expose him to the death penalty.
We're getting a few more details about what actually transpired about his capture. And according to Brett Baer and our Pentagon producers, we're gathering some of this information as we're on the air. Apparently, he was captured during a joint U.S. military law enforcement operation. There were no shots fired. There was no violence. Apparently, Special Operation Forces as well as FBI agents were there on the scene. This is still very much developing, Judge, but we do know that he's on a U.S. Navy ship now heading back to the United States. Is there any obstacles because of how he was apprehended? Is there any things to consider as far as how he's being handled from the point of where he is captured to when he is deposited on U.S. soil?
Well, one of the things that his lawyers, whether they're public defenders or private lawyers, will cause a federal judge to scrutinize was the manner of his arrest and the manner of his treatment between the time of arrest and the time he got to a federal courthouse. And if the government broke any laws or violated any of his rights in that time period, will that affect the outcome of the trial? I will tell you, typically, a judge will say, I don't care how you got here. The point is, you are who the government says you are. You're here. I'm going to defend all of your constitutional liberties once you're here. It doesn't concern me how you got here when you were arrested outside the United States. That's one argument, and there's case law that supports that. The other argument is, was he tortured? Was there a basis for his arrest? Did they just arrest anybody who happened to be hanging out in the hopes that this was one of the guys? It seems like there is a valid basis for his arrest. The government is well experienced. They know not to violate any of his rights because they don't want to affect the outcome of the trial. They already have enough evidence to ground the arrest and probably to begin preparing a case against him. They're not going to kick all that away.